Welcome to Counterpoint. I'm Tanya Granick-Allen. On March 22nd, 2022, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and NDP leader Jagmeet Singh announced an agreement to form what is essentially a coalition government between their respective political parties. Not an official coalition, but it sort of has the gist of that. And this will last until June 2025. Recall that the Trudeau Liberals have led a minority government since the election in fall 2019. The Liberals' attempt to improve their minority to a majority status failed in last fall's election. Typically, minority governments last about 2 years, and typically opposition parties are itching to bring them down. But with the Conservatives in the middle of a leadership contest and Jagmeet Singh experiencing questionable popularity within his own party, perhaps an election isn't a top priority. So what will become of this new agreement? Does making a deal with the NDP shift Canada further left, perhaps too left for even some Liberals? Or is this seeming coalition a natural fit and simply papering an agreement which has been manifest for some time? Well, joining me now to share their insights are David Clement, North American Affairs Manager for the Consumer Choice Centre, and Elliot Hughes, Senior Advisor with Summa Strategies. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me today. Appreciate your time. So maybe I'll start with you, Elliot. How did this agreement, because again, it's not in a coalition is different, and you can shed some experience and light onto that, but how did this agreement come to be?
Yeah, very important choice of words there, agreement, supply and confidence agreement. So NDP will support the Liberals in certain instances, including when budgets need to be passed and usually related to money. But this all started back at the end of right after the last election, where there was some chatter in the media about the NDP and the Liberals forming, an unofficial coalition or an agreement similar to what we saw last week. So, that's when it all started. I think it went cold from all accounts, but picked back up right around the time of the occupation of Ottawa and the trucker convoy and the protest. And as this uncertainty started to fall over the world with the war in Ukraine, there was a sense amongst the political leaders that perhaps now is the time to revisit those talks and to see where things landed, and that's where we got. That's what we got last week.
Because you're right in some regard that when you have a minority government, in one regard, perhaps some would suggest it's better for checks and balances, but in another way, it does lend to potentially some instability. What is the direction of the country? There isn't one clear vision. Things can shift very quickly. So, David, let me come to you now. With this agreement that's in place, supply and confidence agreement, who benefits from that kind of agreement?
Well, I think that obviously Trudeau himself benefits from this agreement. This gives him some political cushion, although pacts or agreements like this do dissolve. And in theory, it could dissolve, and you could have an instance where it does not hold up, and we see the House vote against the Liberals and force an election prior to this agreed upon date. I do think it benefits Trudeau. I also think it benefits Jagmeet Singh and the NDP in the context of with Mr. Singh, you probably have the most likable individual politician at the federal level we've seen, I would maybe say since his predecessor, Jack Layton. But at the same time, he very much struggles with an electability question nationwide. And the party itself on the NDP side struggles financially to raise money under Jagmeet Singh. And so this does allow the NDP to potentially claim that they've gotten some policy wins. We've seen them claim that with dental care and pharmacare, and raise money possibly in the process for whatever the next general election is. So for me, it benefits those two individuals and their parties. I'm not sure if the Conservatives really benefit from this, and I'm not sure if Canadians at large benefit from this.
Do you have anything to add to that, Elliot? Do you think the Liberals benefit, the NDP? 30 seconds.
I think this is a win-win for everybody. I actually think this is a win for Conservatives as well, particularly conservative policy wonks who now have the time to come up with a strong policy platform. They also have time to get their fundraising back on top. And I think this is going to be good for them as they have to think long and hard about what kind of party they're going to be and be able to choose some of those candidates. So I think that the Conservatives, while they won't say it publicly, are quietly happy with this agreement as well.
Okay, we're going to pick up this discussion in just a few moments. Welcome back. We're discussing the new arrangement between the NDP and Liberals on the federal government. So this arrangement is supposed to stay in place till June 2025, which is, not common for a minority government. Usually you can expect election within 2 years. So maybe there'll be some more stability. We shall see. Before the break, Elliot, we were talking about how this actually could be a hidden benefit, if you will, to the Conservatives. They are in the middle of a leadership contest. And, some are suggesting, and I've seen this new agreement now feature strongly on a lot of the campaign trails. Everybody wants to chime in with their opinion. Do you think this new agreement will help determine who will be the next leader? Do you think it's shifted things one way or the other for any of the contestants?
It's a good question. I think it's a little too early to say. I think Pierre Poilievre is the undisputed favorite to win, but it is a long campaign. And what this agreement also does is it perhaps further alienates some of those centrist Liberals who may then coalesce around a more centrist leadership for the Conservatives. So you're thinking about Jean Charest, Patrick Brown. That narrative or that dynamic is going to play itself out over the next couple of months in that leadership race. It'll be fascinating to watch and see how it does play out. But certainly, I think there's a little bit of wind in the sails, so to speak, of center Canada, whether that's blue, whether that's red, and start thinking about who can they coalesce around as a candidate to take them into that 2025 election.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting because for me, it seems like the Overton window has now shifted to the left a little bit. So what was previously seen as maybe the right is now the center. Do you want to chime in on that, David, at all?
So I think that Elliot is right, that this would probably disenfranchise to some extent those blue Liberals or centrist Liberals who are maybe a little more fiscally minded. I think of the Chrétien and Paul Martin era Liberals who there have been lots of talk about how the party has strayed away from that direction, a direction which many Canadians appreciated. I think that this agreement is confirmation of that. Do I think it's good for the Conservative Party and those centrist candidates? I think it really depends on whether you think those centrist candidates are what the Conservative Party should be. And I think there's a lot of question about the validity of that direction. We've certainly attempted that. The Conservative Party has certainly attempted that with O'Toole. Now, he had some consistency problems, right, in regards to being true blue and then being the red Tory that many would argue he always was. And is that enough to get the Conservatives over the edge? You could make the argument that that approach has failed. It just failed in 2019. And so to go that direction would be a mistake. But I think what's really unfortunate in this deal, coalition by another name, pact, agreement, is it really creates a policy vacuum where we do not have the pro-growth policies, in my opinion, that we need to be implemented in a post-COVID era. And that is really the focus and what we should have. What does our economy look like now that COVID is mostly behind us? How do we recover from that? How do we recover the economic devastation and bring the economy forward? And what does that vision look like? I worry that this gap that we've created between elections ignores a lot of that conversation, because now the policy direction is in some sense determined by the NDP. I personally don't believe that that is the direction this country needs in a post-pandemic era. And so I worry that we are going to replicate some of the mistakes we made prior to COVID, which are going to handcuff us in terms of growth post-COVID.
Elliot, are you shaking your head there? Did you want to jump in? Yeah, I agree with David's points. I'm still a little bit hesitant to fully agree, though. I think there are a lot of Canadians who welcome this. In fact, you see some polling that's just come out more than 2-to-1 Canadians are in favor and think this is a good thing, this agreement. And we got to remember, I think probably us in this interview today are fortunate enough to probably have pretty good dental and health coverage through work. Not a lot of Canadians have that. And this is going to, these deals, if they do come into place, that's going to be huge for many, many Canadians. I don't think we can underestimate how important that is. And of course, it's all about choices. And so we're going to have to figure out what kind of choices we want to make as a country. And I don't discount the fact that we need economic growth in the country. But I think we shouldn't underestimate how important it's going to be to a lot of Canadians across the country.
Okay, I'm going to pause you there, David. We've got to cut to commercial, but we'll come right back to you in just a few moments. Before the break, we were discussing who would benefit and how this would change the political and policy direction in the country. David, you wanted to jump in with something there.
Yeah, so I think that Elliot is right, that there are a large group of Canadians who appreciate the pharmacare and dental aspects of what has been proposed here. But that's not the number one political issue of the day. The number one political issue of the day is housing, especially for people of my generation who are essentially squeezed out of the housing market, who see skyrocketing rents. This coalition or pact or agreement is two parties. One, the NDP, who has no policies to tackle the housing crisis, and the Liberals, who have bad policies to tackle the housing crisis. And so as a millennial voter who cares about that issue, which I think is the number one issue facing folks like myself, there's nothing on the table for us. And yes, it may be beneficial if we don't have coverage for dental to alleviate some of those bills. But that does nothing to address the fact that the average home in Ontario is $1.2 million, or you need to earn $180,000 in the Greater Toronto area to be able to buy the median home. Those are the aspirations that young Canadians like myself have. And those are the aspirations that we're going to be left waiting.
But David, let me ask you this. Usually when you have, again, for lack of a better phrase, a more lefty government, so in this case we have like a center-left coalition, say, wouldn't that normally produce more policies that would incentivize and help with the funding of housing and make it more affordable? Usually that, in my experience, I tend to see those governments kind of tackling it, maybe not the best way, but they tend to take it head on.
David, if I can jump in just really quickly.
Sure.
Housing is under the affordability banner. Housing is the third subject in the agreement document between the two. And so while I can't disagree with you, maybe we have disagreement on the fact that you don't think the policies are right. I think it's hard to argue that it is in fact an area of focus for the agreement. But I'll sort of let you jump in.
Yeah, and I'll elaborate. The Liberals and NDP perceive that they are going to solve the housing crisis with silly things like a ban on blind bidding and other demand side problems, which never address the chronic undersupply of housing. I mean, we need to build at least 1 million new homes in Ontario just to keep up with population growth, and that's to maintain the current standards that we have right now. And so there's no plan on the supply side in the original Liberal platform or in this agreement. And so the two parties can try and tinker with demand or flip-flop on things like a foreign buyers ban and on all of those things, which do absolutely nothing to increase supply. And so when I say there's not much to be appreciated on the consumer side here, it's because they do not have a policy to rapidly increase supply. And if you don't increase supply, we are going to continue to have the chaos that we have now.
Now, in the words of Jagmeet Singh, again, NDP leader, he said, and I quote, "We're not going to let them off the hook just because we have this deal. We're going to fight every step of the way." So, and I have heard Jagmeet Singh speak about housing affordability. I've heard him speak on this. If he stays true to his words, and I don't know, I mean, we'll see what happens. But, I do think that he would press for something like this. In fact, this is his moment to ask for what he likes. This is his Christmas. Is that fair to say, Elliot?
I think Jagmeet Singh is in a really good position, in a really strong bargaining position. What I liked about this agreement is this sort of idea of no surprises. This was what was top top billing in the sense of the opening statements in the agreement itself. They're going to try and keep each of the parties, aware of what's going on. And I think if Jagmeet Singh was right, he would focus on housing, because that's probably the best way for the federal government to play in that inflation cost of living space and be able to demonstrate progress. And whenever the budget does come, I suspect the government will try to take steps. I don't know if they'll go as far as David is hoping, but I think they're going to try to take steps to address that. But I think over the next couple of years, this issue isn't going anywhere, and Mr. Singh has a great opportunity to use it as political leverage as he cranks up the next election.
And I agree that he has leverage, but the problem is that he has leverage to lean in on his bad policy prescriptions to solve the problem, because the NDP does not view this in the sense of chronic undersupply, not to link the provincial party in Ontario too closely to the federal party, but the provincial NDP could be widely considered a NIMBY, not in my backyard, anti-development type party.
Okay, I got to pause you there. We have to cut to commercial. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We're discussing the new NDP Liberal federal government agreement that's been put in place that some people argue is a functional coalition. So let's discuss what's involved. Elliot, defense spending. This seems to be top of mind for many, especially when we discuss the war in Ukraine, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Does this mean that the NDP will have to give in on the defense spending, that they're going to have to allow the federal government to up their spending annually?
Well, Ukraine changed the game on defense spending. I think about 6 weeks ago, no one was talking about defense spending, even though the government spends tens of billions of dollars a year on defense. But obviously, Ukraine changed that. The NDP has made it clear where they stand on defense spending. They think the 2% NATO number target of GDP is an arbitrary number. They don't support it. They do, however, support investing in people, investing in the goods and the services that support the Canadian Armed Forces. So the government Liberals are going to have to find a delicate balance here. I don't think the government or the Liberals were ever planning on meeting 2% of GDP spending on military defense. I think that in the next budget, you will see an increase in military spending that will likely focus on the modernization of NORAD, the pact between Canada and the US to protect North America. I think that is going to be their defense play. I don't think the Trudeau Liberals believe that 2% is the right kind of investment. And I believe that they much prefer making investments in social programs like healthcare, pharmacare, and dental care.
I'll let you chime in here, David. Will Jagmeet Singh disenfranchise or upset a lot of his base if he allows Justin Trudeau to spend even regionally on NORAD? Is that going to upset his base?
I mean, I hope that he ignores his base. And this was one of the most disappointing moments I've seen watching a politician who I genuinely admire in Jagmeet Singh when he said that he was against a 2% commitment. If you look at what is going on in Europe and the policy changes of the Germans, the Lithuanians, the Estonians, the Poles, this is a threat that they have not seen in a very long time. And I think that it's probably time for Jagmeet Singh to set aside his ideological leanings and realize that it's time to have an adult conversation about Canadian defense, about what appropriate spending is. I agree that the 2% number is arbitrary. It is a commitment. We are a valued NATO ally. I would prefer as a country to not have a scenario where our defense minister is saying we have exhausted what we can send to Ukraine because if we send any more, we cannot arm our own soldiers. That was a rather pathetic moment in regards to our own defense.
Well, definitely caused a lot of secondhand embarrassment, that's for sure.
Of course. I mean, we're a powerful, developed nation, and that doesn't mean we have to engage in military adventurism, but it does mean that we have to have a serious conversation about our ability to defend ourselves, defend democracy abroad, and defend those who are fighting for liberal market-based democracies like those in Ukraine.
Okay, I'm going to cut in here
And
because I do want to talk about pharmacare. We only have a minute and a half left, and I'm sorry, but we have to pivot here. The Parliamentary Budget Officer estimated that if we'd go ahead with the NDP pharmacare plan that was costed out in their 2021 platform, it'd be $11 billion per year. There's also a dental plan, $4 billion initially, $1.8 billion thereafter for households below 90K. This to me seems a nice feather in the cap for the NDP. I mean, their supporters have to be happy with that. Elliot?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they're getting these huge social policy commitments approved by the government. They can go on to say that they've continued the legacy started by Tommy Douglas with healthcare and are rounding that out. I mean, I think this is, for me, I mean, it's a no-brainer for the NDP to sign up to this. They're not being forced into an election. They're in a terrible fundraising position. And this just gives them time to plan the next election properly and to soak up the success of some of these policies and to be able to criticize the government if they don't meet those targets.
Okay, last 30 seconds, last comment, David.
There are a lot of, I mean, there's a question about whether we can afford it. I would argue the answer is probably not. Pharmacare in particular, we already have drug shortages, and virtually every health economist on the map has argued that this will worsen that and decrease our bargaining position in terms of innovative drug access in Canada. And my worry is that we've rushed into a pharmacare discussion by virtue of this agreement without actually realizing what the externalities are.
Okay, we'll have to leave it there, and we'll see you both again probably in the near future when we see what this coalition, this agreement manifests. Thank you both so much. Well, if there was ever any confusion as to what the Liberals were thinking or what their policy agenda would look like going forward, I think this agreement sort of cements those lines. For Counterpoint, I'm Tanya Granick-Allen.